So let us start with the first nice talk. So please open your presentation and start immediately. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, good morning to all of you. My name is Fujita from the University of Tokyo. First of all, thank you very much to the organizing committee for inviting me to take part in this event, World Wood Day, which is always such an exciting and enlightening event. Today, my talk will be on the structural system of historical log architecture in Japan. The traditional architecture in Japan, I will not explain, of course, everything due to time restriction, but log architecture is one of the prototype of traditional timber structure in many regions. But in Japan, however, we have many traditional Japanese architecture of timber construction. Actually, the timber construction is our main traditional architectural type. But most of the structural system is mainly of post and beam construction, as seen on the picture on the above side, with columns and beams, with walls or without walls. But log architecture in Japan is very small in number. It is not the major structural construction type, but has some distinct characteristics. So please let me describe about these traditional log architecture in Japan. In other regions and countries in Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, United States, Canada, there are many log architecture, but the common shape of the cross-section are mainly round or square or rectangular. In Japan, the traditional log architecture has cross-section of a triangular shape, sometimes pentagon, hexagon, but triangular in general. And therefore, the corner sections, the corner joints around here, inevitably has a very complex joint. So therefore, the triangular shape is nice from aesthetical point of view with the horizontal shades, but it has a very complex restriction, especially at the joints. So it is very puzzling why this kind of joint and why this kind of triangular shape was used. And there is no evident answer to this question yet. So we have been surveying these traditional log architecture in Japan for several years, 10 or more years. And from literature survey and preliminary investigation, we found that there are 69 these traditional log style architecture. Some examples are seen here. This is an example of an 8th century storehouse, and you can see this distinct triangular shape. Another one of our oldest existing log architecture, traditional type of log architecture, is seen in the center called Shosoin. This is an official storehouse of the treasure house of the imperial family. And also more recent 13th century example of a Buddhist temple storehouse is here. And we operated on-site investigation on all these 69 buildings and went on-site and surveyed each log, how they are made and where are the annual rings and what is the size of the elements and so on. So today I will explain a little bit about our results. Out of the 69 traditional log style architecture, 62% were constructed before 1868, well, 19th century, so to say. And after 19th century, there are several, but some are made of reinforced concrete and a little bit different from context. So for us today, this presentation will mainly focus on pre-19th century traditional log architecture, which is 62%, 43 buildings. And these pre-19th century log architecture, even though they are log architecture from exterior observation, the structure type is actually not so purely log. The purely log, which means that the logs are load bearing, the vertical load is only 20%, and 25% has columns and beams inside, and also the log walls. And the load-bearing system is not so evident. So some part of the vertical load is carried by the column, other is carried by the wall, and the differentiation is very difficult. So we call this combination. And the 50% is actually of post and beam frame construction. And the log system is only the exterior wall. So, and 7% we could not understand from on-site investigation and also literature survey what is the structural system is. So actually the pure log system is not so majority in size, as you can see. And this is the type of assembly of the log. 70% has the log protruding outside like this. Two examples are seen. And the more orthodox ones have the logs stacked on each other, but several have the logs on the same height. And this joint is very puzzling. How this kind of joint is made is actually very difficult to understand. And some have the corners cut, so we cannot see the joint protruding outside. This accounts for about 20%. And 12% they have columns outside, and the logs are inserted into the column. So this is evidently a frame, post and beam frame structure with this horizontal looking wall, the log walls. And also the sewing of the lumber could be one great hint of why this kind of system was used. And there are several with annual rings inside the log, and some have them on the edge and some on the back side, and also some are cut from very large dimension trees. So there are several types of logging. And this is an example. For example, this building, we surveyed where the annual rings are. And in result, the yellow part, which is outside, this type was the largest in number of all the logs in this one building. So this kind of research survey we did for all the buildings. And all the size and the location of the annual rings, which we could identify, were surveyed. And the higher ones are the oldest. And as it goes down, newer ones. You can see that the older log buildings have larger logs in dimension. And I was hoping that there would be a trend of the logging system, if older ones may have the logs in the annual rings in the center and gradually taking logging from one large tree or something else. I was hoping to see some kind of a trend, but actually we could not see such evident trend. One reason is because that some of the logs were repaired and changed after the days, and it was quite difficult to identify which of the elements were inserted later on. So for our point of view, our conclusion was that we cannot say decisively say, but in the older for older buildings, actually the log system is not purely log system, but combination. Many of the buildings had log walls with post and beam construction, and the load-bearing system was not so clearly understandable. And in 12th century to 16th century, only log system was seen. But afterwards, earlier, closer to the present day, the log system became a part of the frame system, or the log wall became only an exterior wall, and the load system is supported by the frame. Also, the size of the cross-section was larger in older buildings, but gradually became smaller, and especially when the load is supported by the frame, the log shape became very slender and not load-bearing, but only used as exterior facade. So this is and I did not talk about the 20th century log system, which is actually still used today, but only of the traditional style of architecture was explained today. So 69 traditional style log architecture was surveyed, and 43 were constructed before 19th century. The characteristic and transition of log architecture in Japan from several points of view were surveyed and discussed. From the point of shape of the log section, logging, frame and wall system were discussed. And there are several changes and characteristic, but we still cannot identify for sure why this kind of complex, strange shape of log was used, and why this complex kind of joint was used. But there are several characteristics which I have shown today. Thank you very much. This study was financially supported by JSPS.
Many thanks for the very nice talk. So are there questions? Sorry, I forgot at the beginning questions. You can raise your hands right now and ask the presenter. But you can also type in your question at the chat, and I will have a look on it. So are there any questions and comments to Mrs. Fujita? I have a question for you. I really like your presentation. You mentioned the beams were produced by sawing. Did you try to reconstruct the way of sawing it? So that means how many pieces were cut out of one tree? Did you try to incorporate dendrochronological analysis? Maybe you can see that you have more than one piece of the same tree in the building. Something like this would be very nice.
Oh, thank you. That's a very nice question. Thank you very much. It would be ideal to do that, but unfortunately, most of the log architecture constructed before 19th century, 43 in total. Out of this, 37 are designated as cultural properties of the national government, and it is very difficult for us to take samples. The Ministry of Culture will be very angry if we do this without. But it would be a very important information, because it would be nicer, if possible, if we can cut the dimension to see where the annual rings are, because many of the logs were deteriorated on the outside. So we tried to identify where the annual rings are, but sometimes this is quite evident, but for some buildings, it was not evidently, cannot be observed very evidently. So we made these hypotheses of logging from one tree or other trees, but we could not identify even the annual rings. But it will be much nicer if we could find if this was all cut from one tree, or at least the age of the tree, because some of the logs were inserted later on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Gretel has the same question, which you already answered. Marta.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And thank you, Professor Fujita. Very interesting presentation. I was also, of course, wondering about the tree ring patterns, but maybe more to see whether in those transition periods, there is a change in the forest. So maybe there's been overused and then they have smaller sizes or faster grown or slow grown. My question was going around that, but I mean, I know now the answer. If you don't have access to the tree rings, then it's difficult. Maybe this is also an argument that you can use towards the Ministry of Culture to actually allow some dendrochronologists to go there and check it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will keep that in mind and try to talk with the officers in the Ministry of Culture. Yes, and the point of view of the forest is also very important, because in the earlier stage, 7th to 11th century, there was a lot of cutting of forest in Japan to make new Buddhist temples and palaces. So the deforestation was very severe until 11th century, until about 12th century. After 17th century, the the government at that time started plantation. So the situation became much better. But before this time, deforestation was not from environmental point of view, but mainly from making a new large buildings to secure large dimension timber was very difficult at around 11th, 12th, 13th century. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Rutele. Are the logs made of coniferous or broadleaf species?
Mostly from conifers, because especially in the earlier stage, our carpentry tools are not able to cut vertically. For logging, vertical sawing was not done. From documentation, we know that 13th to 14th century, the saw for vertical cutting was imported to Japan. Before this, there were these saws in China, but we do not have documents or evidence that it was used in Japan. So the trees were split and used. Therefore, soft conifers with straight grains were very important for logging in Japan until 13th, 14th century. After that, a vertical saw was imported. So it was possible to use hard, wide-leaved trees, but mostly conifers were still used. Thank you.
Many thanks. There's another question, a last one, then we have to switch to the next one about the joints. Did you find any kind of adhesive nails or any other kind of joining methods?
No adhesives. Basically, Japanese traditional joints are used only by connecting with cut and the grooves and pegs. And these are the joints that we could identify, because when the buildings are finished, we cannot see the joints. So only for the buildings which were dismantled and repaired, we have documents of the joints. And there may be some more. I'm looking for some more, but these are the only joints that we could find at this moment. And they're all very complex and different, but no adhesives. Basically, no adhesive is used, and no nails, no hardware, just used with timber, carving, grooves, and pegs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again for the very nice talk, and I really would love to see a manuscript on your work in our journal. Maybe
Okay.
to
I'll be happy
compare
to.
also with the European style log buildings. This would be really, really nice. So I hope we will meet again, or we will meet in person to discuss these
Okay.
topics. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gabna. Bye-bye.
Bye.